Leading us through the Ideathon is a seasoned communications expert who works with various international NGOs in education, environment, and climate change sectors. Lerato Balendran is also a meditation trainer and facilitator with Heartfulness Institute and has been sharing this practice of heart-centered meditation for the past 10 years. As an avid traveler for work and leisure, Lerato has shared her positive experience of how meditation alleviates stress in centers including Ghana, Ethiopia, America, UK, and her home in South Africa. Lerato is deeply passionate about safeguarding the future of our planet and will hopefully share some insights on this theme with us today. Over to you, Lerato.
Great. Thank you so much, Diksha, and welcome everybody. It truly is such a pleasure to be here with everybody and joining this virtual retreat. It's a fantastic pleasure, and as the speaker has said, my name is Lerato Balendran, and I am joining you all from the beautiful mother city known as Cape Town in South Africa. And, if any of you know anything about Cape Town is famous for its beautiful natural landscape. We've got beautiful oceans here and, the beautiful, well-known Table Mountain. And of course, some really significant historical sites, such as the Robben Island, which imprisoned prolific and high-level political activists such as the late Nelson Mandela. So it's really such an honor to be in such a place and to be connecting with you all from this really incredible space. And, as Diksha has said, please, for everybody who's joining us on Facebook and on all the social media channels, please post your questions, post your comments. And of course, at this stage, since I've told you where I'm joining you all from, if you've got any pictures you would like to share with us of where you are from, if there's any beauty around your environment right now, please do share that with us. Nothing like sort of reminding us that, even through difficult times, there's definitely silver linings and beauty around us that we could all look forward to. So I look forward to receiving your comments on that. Great. Now to get us, into the topic, of course, on this third day of the seminar, we're focusing on leadership and community, and really most importantly, thinking about what are those attributes that are required and needed for strong, positive, good leadership that basically can contribute to viable, practical solutions that can be implemented throughout society, starting with our communities and then throughout society, of course, This session is also meant to be an ideathon, an ideathon for impact. And as we all know, the ideal scenario is, we would theoretically all be in a room together where we could brainstorm these really fantastic ideas and really have a short, intensive brainstorming session where young, talented people such as yourself out there can generate fresh ideas to solutions and problems that we're facing. So because we're going to be doing this virtually, once again, I really encourage everybody to participate through the menti.com software and on Facebook to write your comments and really just engage with this session because, it's the only way we can sort of share ideas together and really make sure that the session is one that's beneficial to you and hopefully inspiring as well going forward. Great stuff. So perhaps you're wondering, why would we have this ideathon for impact, particularly with the youth at this time? And to really answer that question, I think it's mainly because, the future really lies with the youth, and just in case you weren't really sure or don't really know why the youth is so powerful, I'd like to remind you actually of a young Swedish environmental activist who really inspired the world and gained international recognition solely because she took a problem that she recognized, in her own community, and a problem that was sort of spreading across the world. And she realized that even as a young person, she herself had the capacity, had the tools, and was really driven to bring about change in society at large. So I'd like to, bring in the power presentation. If we could just go to the first slide, please. If you all remember the young Greta Thunberg from, the young Swedish environmental activist who inspired the hashtag Fridays for Future School climate change movement, right? Which motivated thousands of young people around the world to really stand up for the environment, to really stand up for Mother Nature, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of you around the world participated in these hashtag Fridays for Future youth climate strikes. And we can move on to the next slide. And of course, once again, if anyone participated in those strikes, please, in the comment section, please share with us your experiences, any photos that you had. I personally, as an environmentalist, would love to know how young people around the world participated in these youthful climate strikes, and let's keep that conversation going. Once again, Greta, basically last September, she motivated around 4 million people joined her in the climate strikes, across 161 countries, which to date is still the largest climate demonstration in history. Right? I mean, how impactful is that? And following that action, of course, then, we all remember Greta gave a really passionate and tearful speech to world leaders at the UN Climate Summit. And we can go to the final slide. Which basically led to Greta being known as and being named as, the Time Person of the Year, which is really, really a massive contribution. And it really shows that, young people can actually do so much. And so if you're sometimes sitting there thinking to yourself, what can I do as a young person? Please do remember you've got young inspirational leaders such as Greta, who has really proven to the world that, the youth definitely have the power to overhaul systematic change. Thank you for the presentation. Great. Now that we're all inspired and motivated, let's sort of dive deep and see how we can tackle this ideathon of ours. And to get us started, I would like for us to perhaps let's think of a problem. I would like to invite you all to perhaps think about, 3 of the largest problems that you think are impacting society as a whole right now. And that could also be, that also means problems that you are seeing in your community right now that you think are the biggest problems that we could perhaps then, discuss and see how we can come to solutions to that. So I'll give you a few minutes to perhaps just go onto the Menti. There you go. We've got the menti.com that's come up with the code at the top there. I hope everyone can join in. And if you could use the software to start typing in, 3 problems that you think that the world is facing right now. And, it really doesn't have to be great. We've got education, we've got environment that's coming up. I will give you all a few minutes. And don't be shy. You know, I think the objective of this exercise is to help us look around us, you know, help us look at what's happening around us and what are those problems that we can identify that need solutions. Great. Yep. Seems education is quite high up there. Climate change is quite high up there. I'm pretty sure we had a lot of you following all the youth climate strikes that were taking place. And poverty as well as coming up as a big issue. Great. So it seems the poll is telling us that we've got the environment, poverty, and pollution as potentially the biggest problems we face in society right now. Sure, and I'm just looking at this and sort of the list is growing really, really large, right? Which goes to show that really as humanity right now, we are facing a lot of problems, which is obviously a bit unfortunate, but at the same time, we know that problems actually do present solutions. And so just to dig deeper, now that we've sort of identified, we've got there the environment, we've got pollution, we've got poverty as three of the biggest problems. I'd invite you all to perhaps let's take these three. Let's take environment, let's take pollution, and let's take poverty. And out of these three problems, which ones would you say are the most pressing, or perhaps which one would you say we could work with in this session out of those three, if we could choose one to work with in this session? I'll invite you to do that now. Great. Fantastic. Yep. I'm seeing the poll going up. Seems indeed we do agree that these are problems we can work with. Great. Great, those polls are going up. And I think we just needed to take a step back a little bit. So remember, we've identified three problems. We've identified the environment, we've identified pollution, and we've identified poverty as a problem. So out of those three, which ones would we say is the one problem that we would like to deal with today? Great. So we're just going through the technical issues here. So if we have identified the environment, pollution, and poverty, out of those, let's take one problem. Let's try and find one problem. Let's try and vote on one problem. Would you say the environment, pollution, and poverty is one problem that is a problem that we could look at for this session? Let's try and see if we can get an answer to that. What is that one problem that we would like to dive deep into today? Okay. I think basically everyone is sort of leaning more towards the environment and pollution, which is really exciting for me because, you know, that is my sector. That's one thing I'm definitely passionate about. And going back into, the next sort of Menti slide that tells us that definitely the environment and pollution is the pressing issue that we all want to work with. And it really does make sense at this stage because, it's been pretty interesting how we've seen the environment and climate change and climate impacts have really affected people around the world. Whether you're sitting in the first world or, here in Africa as well, there's been a lot of devastating impacts, environmental impacts, whether it's sort of, deforestation and, escalated droughts and floods across the world that we know always leave the most vulnerable communities impacted, right? So I'm really glad that we all agree that the environment is an issue that we can tackle and is quite relevant to you and we can all work with it. And so another question is perhaps, does this problem apply to you and your community? How do you sort of see climate change? Do you see climate change and climate impacts? Wow, that's an overwhelming yes. That's an overwhelming yes at this stage. And it must be quite frightening, to witness and to see the way in which Mother Nature has been changing over these years, as all of us are worldwide, all of us are all on lockdown right now due to, the global health crisis. On the flip side of it, it really has been interesting to notice sort of the narrative that's coming out from the climate change world, right? Where for the first time, we really are seeing carbon emissions are coming down. People are flying less. This morning I saw a really incredible video of in different parts of the world where animals are starting to come out into the streets and are taking over because of, there's less human activity in the world right now. So it really goes to show, I think, the importance of the interaction between human beings and the environment and how important it is that we really start seeing ourselves as working, as being part of nature and working in harmony with nature, which is really, really really important. And the last question for me, if you know anyone that's basically been impacted or adversely impacted by climate change or climate impacts, I'll give you a few moments to answer that. Wow. A huge, overwhelming yes, once again. So I guess we can definitely say, even post and looking beyond this global health pandemic, climate change really does seem to be a huge issue. The environment is something that we're all thinking about, and even if you don't see it directly in your own environment, for example, if you've never experienced a flood or if you've never lived through a drought, for example, you've probably seen it in the news. You've probably heard of communities that struggle to find water, for example, and really just hearing about these ongoing impacts that are completely being exacerbated. And it seems we've got some questions that are coming in. I'd like to open it up and take some questions. Great. We're still filtering some questions that are coming through. Thank you for that. Thank you for everyone who's interacting and participating in this session.
Lerato, I think some people are asking about the impact of COVID-19 and how we can start to build up the community and build up businesses after this is over.
So impact of COVID-19 and building up businesses. Great. Okay, so we've got some interesting questions that have been coming in, people wanting to know about the impacts of COVID-19 and how we can recover and rebuild from this stage. Those are really interesting questions. When I try and think of the impacts of COVID-19, both personally and professionally, at a personal level, I do admit that I do feel this health crisis has come to us at a time when humanity really needs to take time to stop, to reflect, and to dive deep and to really look at how we've been interacting with nature and this beautiful planet that's been given to us. And although it does come at really such a high price because of the huge numbers that we've seen of, affected people around the world, and of course the fatalities around the world, we do know that, at a deep and a spiritual level, all things happen for a reason. And perhaps this is just one of those times when really humanity is meant to think and reflect about how we've been contributing to Mother Nature and to humanity over the last few decades, and in terms of building up businesses from this, I think that's a nice question that leads us into the second part of this session, which is solutions, right? Because we don't want to just be discussing problems. We also want to find solutions and walk away feeling inspired about what we can do with problems that we see in our own communities. There's a question that has come in. What is the best tool we can use to develop climate change awareness in the lower socioeconomic communities? That's a really great question. Thank you. Right now there's just so many tools out there that's available in the form of information when it comes to understanding climate change and climate impacts, right? And so one of the few suggestions I would definitely give to you is to just research and find local NGOs within your communities that are involved in climate change and climate change work, right? Because there you will really find a space where you can engage with the group that's already doing the work. You can be empowered in terms of having the relevant scientific information, to empower your engagement when you go out into communities and really ensure that you're meeting the needs of that particular community. And so I think that's one way in which you can sort of engage with climate change and just finding those communities in those groups in your communities that are already doing the work that you can contribute to. And is it possible to build a successful business that is also solving real world problems? Oh, definitely. I mean, I think that's what they call social entrepreneurship, right? And once again, this is sort of the right time to go into the second session where we try and find solutions to existing problems, right? As we know, for every problem there is a solution. And now let's collectively try and see, now that we've identified the environment and climate change as a massive problem, let's try and list a few solutions that we could come up with. So I now hand over back to you to give you the time and space to probably just think about solutions for climate change and pollution within your own communities that you can already start impacting and start implementing. So I'll give you some time to do that as well. Please feed into the comment section on Facebook and on the social media platforms. I'll be happy to read those answers as well. So I'll give you a few moments to do that on thementi.com. Recycle and reuse. That's really great. Becoming stronger. Avoiding plastics. Sure, that's a huge one. It's almost one of those ongoing topics, and how best to avoid plastics, and hoping that also the big corporates can actually heed this massive call, right? Wow. Becoming vegetarian, segregation of garbage, recycling, use only what is needed, change consumption patterns. That's a big one. That's really stay home and stay safe. Yep. Being more mindful of our resources, which is a really, really big one. Yes, and if I could work with, being mindful of our resources, I think that's also a huge part of what we're seeing with this lockdown. Worldwide, we're using less resources, and we can see how Mother Nature is responding to that in a good way, right? And so perhaps if we post this period, if we sort of, continue on this trajectory of being mindful of our resources, and of the beautiful nature that we have around us and this one planet that we have, we could really hope to really mitigate a lot of the climate change impacts we're seeing worldwide. Mm-hmm. Cleanliness of our surroundings, that's true. Mm-hmm. Love nature, that's a big one. Nothing wrong with being a tree hugger during this time, and it's also, such a reciprocated relationship between nature and human beings, right? Living simply and sustainably, which is a huge, concept to sort of explore how to simplify ourselves, how to simplify our lives, so that we really are living more in balance and in tune with nature. Great. These are really great solutions. I have a question that has come in here. When there is a contrast of nations who are trying to solve climate change related problems, which are at different socioeconomic levels, how do we tailor solutions for individual nations or groups? That's a very good question. Thank you, Kushal Raj. I think a huge part of problems that we see around the world is the fact that we are always looking at problems from the lens of the other. We remove ourselves and from the problem and always seem like it's those people's problems and not ours, and not realizing just how interconnected and how interrelated we all are. And so without having this massive sort of high level political conversation, I think to answer that question, I would go back to, once again, really just see what's happening in your community when it comes to the environment, and to sort of, small climate change NGO groups that are within your communities that you can work with. Because it's only when we really start affecting change at home can this change start spreading out to a macro level, And, once again, let's not remember our youth icon, right? Greta, right? She started off in her own community by protesting by herself and sort of not going to school on Fridays. And that trend picked up, and next thing you know, it was a massive global trend, right? And that just goes to show that sometimes, we really shouldn't be looking to governments and corporates to be giving us solutions, especially as young people. We've got all the energy, we've got all the resources at our hands to really impact the change to affect the change that we want to see in our lifetime, right? Which I think is just so crucial. So I think my answer to that would really just start looking at what's around you, start looking at what groups around you that you can join, that you can also just contribute your time to. NGOs are usually looking for people with experience. When we are transitioning from corporate to impact, how do we interrogate and restarting? How do we approach NGOs, etc.? That's a really great question, and that really shows that people are open to utilizing their time and that spirit of volunteering, right, which is just so critical at this time, and NGOs are always looking for volunteers, for people to sort of, just contribute in whatever shape or form, whether it's in your own professional capacity or skills that you have. You know, a lot of the times, in my previous organizations, when we'd be organizing big climate protests, we'd look for volunteers to come and help us put together the signs, and the banners. And so you would have all these like young people coming together and putting together all those creative signs that we've seen around the world. And that's just, different ways or some examples of how you can contribute to these NGOs, right? And I think a lot of it also comes back to, your purpose, right? Let's bring that into this conversation. Life purpose and how that is so important to how we contribute and how we live our lives, So really don't be shy to think, you've made it into senior management and, you're kind of hoping to restart your career a little bit, or you want to shift a little bit more into the NGO space. Just know that what you have right now, where you are right now, is all that is needed to help and to contribute. You've got all the skills and you've got all the tools that's necessary. So just do a bit of research and see what you can find, and really just continue to contribute as much as possible. And so out of all the list of these amazing solutions that we found, empathy and connection, doing small things that sort of preserve the environment, changing our attitudes towards the environment, which is a huge thing, right? So I just want to bring it back to the poll again and sort of, do we all agree that, some of these suggestions that we have seen coming up, are some of these suggestions relevant? Are these good suggestions that we could try and implement? Oh, that's great. That's great. Fantastic. So yes, most of us agree that these solutions are relevant and they're good solutions, which is really important, when you're going through a process of trying to solve a problem, like world problems can seem so overwhelming. And especially when sometimes when you are the one who's facing a problem, it might be hard to find solutions, and so it's important when you're going through a process where you're trying to find solutions to remind yourself, are these solutions relevant? One of the suggestions that came in terms of, just realizing that interconnectedness between individuals and the environment, right? That's a relevant sort of point to think about, because we cannot separate ourselves, and so the next question perhaps is to ask, if any of these solutions that have come by, if we find any of these solutions practical, So for example, one solution that came in was doing more recycling in our environment, sorting out our garbage, a bit more, watching our consumer habits, using less plastic. Nice. So there's an overwhelming number that's saying, yes, these are practical, these are solutions that we could try and work with. But there are also people who are saying that no, they're not seeing how we could implement these solutions. And perhaps I'd like to open it up and hear some comments as to perhaps why some of you think these solutions are not practical. And let's see what we can do with that. And while I'm waiting for those questions to come in, I'll take another one here. How do we change the minds of people who are not environmentally sensitive, or people who don't believe in climate change? Oh, wow. Thank you. That's a very interesting topic. I mean, I think, it takes me back to, in my professional world, half the time, all we're trying to do is convince people that climate change is real and climate impacts are really just affecting us worldwide. I think, when when it comes to trying to convince people, I think we shouldn't have to worry so much about that, because Mother Nature will do it all on her own. You know, I think the more if we continue, you know, in the manners in which we've been doing, you know, eventually the systems will collapse. You know, eventually we will see more exasperated climate impacts, more droughts, more floods across the world. And really the science, there is a lot of science that backs, you know, climate change and the climate change facts right now. And so I think at some point, you know, there are a lot of denialists out there. And of course, having politicians as denialists as well doesn't really help in terms of changing that narrative, right? And so instead of really, you know, focusing a lot on, you know, those people that really, how do we convince you that this is real? It's really just bring them along the journey, you know, really share with them what you're seeing out there, show them the impact, you know, share with them some stories that you're picking up online, you know, invite them to a group, for example, if there's an NGO or a local meeting, you know, share some science, some facts with them to make them realize that, you know, this is not just, you know, a bunch of, you know, tree huggers that are on the side of Mother Nature, but really this is a problem that's affecting us, and we all can find a way in which we can try and mitigate these solutions. So are there any comments on why perhaps we think some of these solutions are not practical? Okay, so just to move on to the next question, as an individual, which is what's so important, right? Do you sort of see yourself attempting to implement some of these solutions, because that's a huge part of you know what we're trying to support here, is the fact that, you know, you, me, we all have the power to contribute to a positive change around the world, no matter how young and no matter how old, but especially when you're youthful and you're full of energy and you've got fresh, invigorating ideas. It's really important to, you know, look at the problems and to find spaces in which you can contribute, in no matter how small, you know. I'd like to go, you know, think of, you know, the idea of volunteering, for example, you know, which is such a huge contributor to sort of, you know, society and to you yourself as an individual, you know. One always feels so good coming back from volunteering, you know, whether it's in a local NGO or, you know, volunteering to clean up your neighborhood, for example. You know, no matter how small an action, you know, I would encourage you to not doubt that you are a change maker and you are actually contributing to a positive society. We've got another question here from Christina. She says, it is very difficult to reduce the use of plastic. I totally agree with you. I have watched a video on how rubbish has been disposed and cremated, and I was shocked to see that my country's rubbish being dumped in India, dump spaces. I'm wondering what other places or countries do accept rubbish to be dumped and eliminated. Yes, I think I've also seen those documentaries, and it's usually a lot of third world countries that have sort of being politically forced in these situations where they are left to take, you know, all the world's rubbish is being dumped in their countries. But, you know, those are sort of political conversations that are happening at that level. And it is very disheartening, right? To know that, you know, as human beings, we consume and we really don't care what happens with that packet that I've used, you know, that plastic bottle that I've opened. You know, I mentioned earlier that I live in the beautiful city of Cape Town, but it always pains me to realize, you know, there's just so many plastics in the ocean. And people just, you know, just there's an absolute disregard to how we dispose of our rubbish. And so, you know, once again, I think I would like to bring it back to, you know, within your community, you know, what is it that you can do? You know, how is it that we can help our communities and perhaps inform our communities in terms of like, how we use rubbish and, how we use plastic, and, perhaps go to your local municipality office and find out, how does recycling happen, and seeing the places in which you can implement that. You can start it off with your schools, with your classmates, your mates from university, and really think of like, perhaps maybe a campaign that you can start out in your communities, where every Saturday you're collecting all the plastics, or maybe, you're collecting all the glasses, and making sure that you're contributing in some small way, right, to the betterment of your community. Because your question there, Christina, is just such a high level and such a political question, and it can be really disheartening, especially with a lot of the information and the documentaries we're watching that's coming out, that's really amplifying that fear, right, of, oh my gosh, it seems like such a big problem and I will not be able to solve it. I think I'm really just trying to encourage us to bring it down and to come back to our communities and realize you've got the power to be the change maker in your community. Great. I've got another question here. I feel like these solutions are good, but maybe not adapted to the urgency of the problem. How can we find solutions that impact at a larger level and at a quicker way? Wow, that's a really great question. Thank you so much. I mean, sure, there's not one single answer to that. I mean, a huge part of it is really, it comes back to sort of, it's industries, right? It's sort of, monitoring how industries force us as consumers, as individuals in these scenarios where we are left with no options but to continue using these, for example, these plastic bottles, as opposed to finding more recyclable solutions, right? When it comes to sort of, the impacts of carbon emissions, right? We all fly around, we all have cars, we're all driving around to so many places, and, it's having such a massive impact. And it is very hard to sort of look at it from, to want a more global sort of like solution, but it's also important to bring it back to, while at a global level, which is what Greta, our youth iconic leader, really tried to do, right? She tried to take this massive global problem and amplified it and really internationalize it to a point where she had millions of young people really standing up to climate change and to climate impact, but of course there's a lot of political will that's required. There's a lot of systematic change that's required. And so, the wheels of justice are turning. We will get there, and hopefully we will sort of like, meet all our SDG targets, etc. But just remember that, you as a young person in your community, you have the ability to sort of contribute to no matter how small a difference you can make. We still all remember how we used to love planting trees as children. So there are still sort of, small solutions that we can do to contribute to mitigating climate impacts. Great. There's quite a lot of questions that are coming in here. Thank you, Christina. I look forward to sort of seeing some of the solutions you could perhaps implement in your community. And please, at any point, feel free to come back to us and share with us some of those solutions. How should the education system worldwide be changed to mold citizens and leaders of the world for the upcoming future? That's a fantastic question, and thank you so much. And and I think really right now, education is really proving itself to be so critical to shaping the minds of young people, who inevitably end up being future leaders, right? And so, with so much of information overload that's coming on, I really do hope, the education system can be a bit more practical and more tangible, and really start teaching, subjects that are relevant to today, subjects that are relevant to today's problems, and to create and to help shape young leaders who can find solutions to those problems. to those problems, building social entrepreneurs who can not sort of shy away from problems, but really move towards them because they're more inspired and motivated to find the answer. So, I really do hope, worldwide, education leaders and teachers and practitioners are sort of looking at this, current challenge that we have, right, where people are not attending classrooms. And so we're having to step out of our traditional ways of doing things and of teaching and moving to a more sort of like, impactful way of learning and of assimilating information. And I really do hope, education systems around the world can adapt to the needs and really hopefully, create young leaders that can tackle these problems in a socially sort of, balanced way, right? Great. So I think one last poll that I would like to take before I continue with some of the questions is perhaps if we can just check if at a community level you can use these solutions and how you could perhaps implement these solutions. Oh, great. Thank you, Vidi. I've got Vidi who's asking if they can connect with me. Yes, you can, definitely. Please, you can find me on social media social media if you're looking for me. I'd be happy to discuss environment conservation with you. Lucia is asking how to overcome environmental anxiety and despair in order to properly fight climate change. That's such a relevant question, which is something that a lot of us environmentalists go through. It's very disheartening and it can be very hard on a daily basis, to look at the numbers, to read the stats, to sort of continue to be a part of this system that's really just destroying the environment. But one thing I would definitely say to you is, you've got to remain strong. You always have to sort of find that silver lining, right? And to keep yourself motivated. And one way I do that is I always remind myself that, I'm here to sort of to serve and to give back to Mother Nature. And this is my way of doing that, And so when I read all these like hard news and, all these headlines that can be really just like heart drenching, I find my motivation in that, this is actually why I'm here. This is my purpose so that I can contribute to changing those narratives. And, one day, instead of seeing a really bleak and really depressing headline, we can see something that's positive, that shows to a shift that's taken place. So I think just find your strength in the darkness, right? Which is what's required of us at this moment, just to find that silver lining and to find the rainbow in it and to find the strength to keep going, And of course, at a personal level, make sure that you're looking after yourself, One thing we're always saying in this sector is, we really don't need to have wounded soldiers, right? We need everyone to be strong and prepared for this really like this tough fight we have ahead of ourselves. And so I would encourage everyone to look after yourselves, do your yoga, do your meditation, write in your journals, connect with your friends, really do as much as you can to stay positive and to keep yourselves motivated. And just to remember our youth iconic leader, Greta. Can you imagine just how much she had to go through while she was building up this massive profile for herself as well as for the climate environment? Fantastic. Well, guys, this has really, really been such a pleasure. I've had so much fun with you all. I truly hope that you two have found this to be equally engaging, helpful, motivating, and inspiring in different ways. I've got one last question that's come in. I'm currently helping my school write a letter to the Indian Educational Ministry to bring in a handbook manual to aid in more practical knowledge, something that is easily understandable. We were going to suggest social and environmental issues. What suggestions can you give? Oh, I mean, that's great. Social, environmental issues, as well as human rights. rights, so really, once again, just look at what's resonating within your communities, and make sure that any information you put out there is well received by your audience, and it's the sort of thing that everyone can feel a part of. And with that said, I would like to thank you all once again for joining this session. I trust you have found it all motivating and inspiring. And once again, if anyone would like to connect with me, my social media channels, please look for me. And it's been a wonderful pleasure. And I look forward to seeing all the wonderful solutions that come out from the youth worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you, Lerato. I think people really enjoyed your session. We do have a few more minutes. Would you like to take some more questions?
Sure. Do we have some questions that someone asked?
On environmental anxiety, somebody asked how to connect with you. So I guess through your social media channels.
Yes, please. Someone asked, what are the 3 practical changes we can make as individuals on a daily basis? So, 3 practical changes. Once again, I would say just really go back into your environment and see, they always say charity begins at home. So within your own home situations, perhaps think of where you can be more giving. This whole platform is really just to encourage and to remind people that we're moving beyond the me to we. So putting other people in front, seeing who needs what, especially now during this lockdown, there might be, elderly people who can't go to the shops right now. So check up on other people, make sure everyone has everything that they need, pick up a phone and motivate someone, check up on people that you don't know how they're doing. So, the idea is really just to think about what's around you. What do you have around you? What tools do you have? What networks do you have to help you sort of get into that space where you can start thinking of others and putting others before yourself?
Thank you, Lerato. So it's been a pleasure having you here, and I personally really enjoyed the way that you speak and such a positive outlook that you seem to radiate, even though we're talking about problems and how to overcome them. So thank you once again for your time.
Thank you so much, Diksha, and thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.